We'd spend the next 3 hours until the grocery store opened, practicing gun safety, loading, aiming, reloading, and clearing any possible jams. A firearms malfunction during a collapse could be terminal. I got the feeling Jody would never be completely comfortable holding, let alone firing a gun. I had 2 pistols, both Glocks. I gave Jim one of my Glock 19s and I'd keep the other so we could conceal carry on our maiden grid down voyage to gather additional supplies today. I hoped on day 1 it wouldn't be complete pandemonium and madness yet. We'd assess the situation as we approached and anticipate leaving the long guns behind in the vehicle. The plan was for Jim and I to enter the store while Brian and Jody waited in a vehicle I hoped was operational. If none of our 4 vehicles were functioning, Jim and I would make the 3/4 of a mile trek on foot. I told Jim we would be going in armed. He asked if that was absolutely necessary. I explained to him carrying concealed makes you more observant. When carrying a firearm, you have the ultimate power of force in your control. With a great power is an equally great duty to stay aware. I told him, stay watchful. There is a possibility you could be attacked or lose control of your pistol. We must be alert to all potential threats in case we need to use our weapons. Jim, remain cognizant of how you act so your weapon remains concealed and does not create a problem or threat for others. I continued on saying, defensive uses of firearms don't always need to result in harm or death. Merely brandishing a gun or telling would-be assailants about a gun may prevent victimization. Police response time, even in the best of conditions, is usually a matter of minutes. Police response time during Armageddon would be non-existent. When a criminal is approaching Jim, most people only have seconds to react. It's better to be armed and prevent injustice than to wait for help and potentially become a victim. Knowing I can defend and protect you, and you doing the same for me, is incredibly empowering. Unfortunately, a world without rule of law, power, and order makes for a world filled with vigilante justice and reckless gun owners. I asked the 3 of them if they followed my directions hours earlier and had inventoried their supplies. Brian was a big guy who had a food supply that would most likely outlive his kidney disease. Jim and Jody lived life day to day and would routinely make multiple trips to the grocery store each week. They said if they conserved, they had maybe a week's worth of food readily available. Luckily for them, I had a minimum of 9 to 12 months stored away in my apartment. What about money, I asked. With no power, your debit cards and credit cards are now worthless. Like most people around the world, Jim, Jody, and Brian had very few dollars on hand. Only 10% of money exists as cold hard cash. The entire global financial system runs on electricity. Banks don't have piles of money sitting in vaults for us. It's a bunch of bits, dots, and dashes stored in electronic computer systems that are now inaccessible. Everyone's lifetime savings was just wiped out in a matter of seconds. It's likely at some point soon we'll resort to a barter economy, but for now, with the cash we have at hand, we'll use it to acquire additional supplies. Brian had less than $20, 18 to be exact. Jim and Jody fared better. Between the 2 of them, they had $83. Their $101 combined wasn't going to change our fate much during a post-societal collapse, so I once again returned to my gun safe, walked back to the table with a wad of cash. I habitually stashed away money in my safe, with denominations ranging from dollar bills up to $100 bills. Not only was I the cool, funny neighbor who blasted Prince music through the walls, I was the one who was going to do my best to save your 3 asses in a world gone dark, I told them. Long-term foods, both perishable and non-perishable, along with water and additional fuel for our propane heaters, were our priority. As daybreak broke on December 13th at 7:40 a.m., I heard the familiar sound of the first generator firing up. A generator was a double-edged sword to own during power outages. During a normal blackout or storm-inducing event, it was a game changer. In the apocalypse, the noisy, blaring sound would most definitely put a target on you and your family. As I pulled back my curtains and blanket from my window, I could see the neighbors from other buildings beginning to gather outside. Children throwing snowballs and making snow angels in the freshly fallen snow. Their innocence didn't belong in this new world, for it was a world of bitter, harsh realities, a world sure to be full of starvation, famine, disease, and death. As I watched them play, I thought to myself how fortunate I was not to be raising kids of my own during a time of reckoning. I never found the love of my life, married and started a family. Both my parents had long since passed, each the result of cancer. I had an older sister who lived some 1,000 plus miles away in Florida. I hadn't seen her or my nephew and nieces in well over a year pre-COVID. I hoped and prayed they were okay. Sadly, I'd never really know their fate now in a world without electricity. No more phone calls, texting, or social media to keep tabs on loved ones who lived out of state. As I looked out into the horizon facing to the east from my second-story balcony, the sky was still littered with smoldering smoke from the burning cityscape. Most of the neighbors huddled outside noticed it too. I explained to Jim, Jody, and Brian that under no circumstance are we to reveal the destruction, ruin, and disaster that faces our current lives with the neighbors. No need to create more panic and agitation before we left on our mission, I said. Once it was successfully completed, then and only then can we warn neighbors that we are friends with how grim and dire the situation is. Let's gather our supplies first from the town and hopefully deal with the least amount of people as possible. The small town I lived in had a population of less than 30,000. Regrettably, the apartment complex I lived in housed probably 1,000 plus tenants throughout a few hundred buildings laid out around 2 streets. 1,000 hungry, desperate, hopeless, and dangerous potential adversaries situated far too close for comfort. We were stationed 12 miles west of the city's populace. A major interstate connected my town to hordes of unprepared city dwellers. Unless the extemporary masses had 4x4 vehicles or snowmobiles, I didn't fear them wandering by foot through the bitter cold and snow of a western New York winter and coming my way just yet. There's only one thing left to do, you guys, I said. Grab your keys and let's see if any of our vehicles are operational. Jim began to walk away, leaving the Glock 19 and spare magazines I had given him on my table. Whoa, 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 I yelled. Looking back hesitantly, he said, "What?" "You forgot your sidearm," I exclaimed. "You don't go anywhere from now on without this on your body. I don't care if you're just going outside to urinate. You do it armed." As we pushed open the front door to our building, moving aside the 10 plus inches of snow that fell overnight, the smell of uncontrolled and raging fires was the first thing I noticed. Trudging down the walkway to our 4 vehicles parked side by side, we eagerly began clearing and removing the snow from them. The unplowed road was the first sign that this wasn't your average snowfall. Normally by 5 a.m. the workers would have the road and parking lots cleared, Sunday morning or not. As I connected both my batteries back up to my vehicles, Jody's Toyota Sinatra turned over and fired to life. Jim's Nissan Juke did the same. Brian's Ford F-150, the only 4x4 vehicle of our group, also started. My Ford Transit work van turned over as the static of the radio station echoed through the speakers. Finally, my personal vehicle, a Dodge Challenger with a 5.7-liter V8 engine, roared to life. From the looks of things, the massive solar flare had no effects on vehicles' electronic circuits and heavy current, and thus no effect on off-grid power systems either, I guessed. "Check your radios and gas gauges," I hollered over to the 3 of them. Both my vehicles had full tanks of gas. I never let either get below half a tank, regardless if it was wintertime or not. Jim and Jody, my unprepared good-time partying neighbors, both had less than a quarter of a tank in their vehicles. Brian's metallic silver 4-wheel drive Ford F-150 had 3/4 of a tank. It was an obvious decision we'd be taking his truck out onto the unkept, sloppy, snow-covered roads for our expedition. 15 hours since the CME hit the planet. Radio stations were still silent. No news, no information, meaning most likely no help was coming. "Let's load up Brian's truck and get on the road," I ordered. I returned up to my apartment to retrieve our bundle of cash, our two-way radios, and the ultimate equalizer, my semi-automatic AR-15 rifle, along with some non-compliant New York State 30-round magazines. As I went back to Brian's vehicle, with my AR now hidden away inside my guitar case, so I did not startle and shock the growing number of neighbors now gossiping about the power outage and smoke-filled sky, Jim asked if I was going to strum some music on our car ride, seeing the guitar case I used to conceal my rifle. "Not exactly, buddy," I answered. "What's in here is for a worst-case scenario. If shit goes sideways, we'll need some more firepower than 9mm pistols, something that can put distance between us and a threat." The three of them had never seen a scary black rifle before, and by the look on Jody's face, she was completely flabbergasted by my rifle. Side-mounted flashlight, a Vortex Strikefire 2 red dot sight, and a bayonet attachment for my Ontario M9 in case I ran out of rounds, which wasn't going to happen with my stockpile. Jim and Jody sat in the back of the extended cab as I rode shotgun up front with Brian. I said, "I bet you're not going to miss the vehicle payment on this, are you, Bri?" He just nervously laughed as he concentrated on maneuvering down the unplowed road. As we made it to the entrance of our complex, where we would hang a right to head into town, I said to the three of them as I looked up at the sky, "You see that?" Jim said, "See what?" "I don't see anything," Jody muttered. "Exactly," I answered back. "Where's the high transmission lines on the utility poles? The wires are completely gone." As someone who made a living climbing poles, I was always aware what was above my head, always making sure not to come in contact with anything that could kill me. "Where'd they go?" Jim asked. I'm betting the solar flare overload was so intense, they literally exploded and vaporized off the pole. Best case scenario, we're probably looking at 2 to 3 years before the world's back on the grid again, I said. At that exact moment, Brian knew his fate was sealed, along with millions of others who depended on modern medicine and electricities to survive. Over 1.5 million people are living with type 1 diabetes, and their pancreas can't produce insulin. Once their supply runs dry, their cells will start malfunctioning, and within 7 to 10 days, they will die too. Hospitals are required to store enough fuel on site to keep backup generators running for at least 96 hours. That means by this Thursday, most hospitals would now be 5-story morgues filled with dying and decomposing bodies. It was only 3/4 of a mile down the road to Food Town. I've made this walk hundreds of times pre-CME. My local pub was 4 businesses down from the grocery store. I was a regular there who always hijacked the jukebox. Nothing goes better with a cold beer than great music. Wistfully, those days and memories are over now. No more drinking after a 50-hour work week. No more happy hours. No more birthday shots. Aside from my local pub and grocery store, the small town plaza also included a Walgreens, a liquor store, a pizza shop, bank, a Family Dollar, and a Dunkin' Donuts. I fully expected within 3 days the pharmacy of the Walgreens would be looted as people would become desperate for life-saving medications. Brian asked if he should drop his plow on the front of his F-150 to help clear the roads. "No," I answered. "Keep the roads as impassable as possible for now. No need to make it easier for others to travel and compete for our supplies. 50 million Americans became food insecure during this pandemic. With the lights out for the foreseeable future, that number is sure to quadruple. You guys do understand the modern food system is totally dependent on electricity for growing, harvesting, transporting, and refrigerating. All of this is instantly collapsed. Regional warehouses only have enough food stored to feed the population for 30 days. After 30 days, there is no food. After 72 hours, emergency generators that keep the food cool will run out of gas. As people slowly start to realize the extent of this catastrophe, supermarkets will become shootouts. Smash, grab, and shoot to feed their famished, anguished, and desolate family, I said. This is our one and only voyage to the grocery store. Get what we need and get the hell out as fast as possible. Binoculars in hand, trying to hold them as steady as possible, Food Town was within sight. Looks like we're not the only ones grocery shopping during Armageddon, I said to my 3 neighbors.